Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour, Optometry's longest running show. I'm Eugene Shatsman, your host. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts so that you can be in the know every single time a show drops. So we've got a great episode for you today. And let me give you the premise. If I asked 100 practices, what is one area where your practice might have a bit of a blind spot? I'm sure that for almost all of those practices, incoming phone calls would be somewhere on the list. It's absolutely crazy to me how much people invest on making the phone ring and how little they pay attention to what happens on the phone when it does ring. And you're not just spending money, you're spending goodwill, reputation, your time. And with one bad phone call or one bad patient experience on the phone, all of those precious resources just totally go to waste. So today I invite the ultimate practice optimizer, my colleague, Dr. Jeff Lewis, to the show. Jeff has an impressive resume. He is just so knowledgeable in so many things. And today we almost miraculously focus on just one of those things, a very important thing, and that is the phones. We talk about all of the data of what's happening on the phones, what we hear when we listen to tens of thousands of phone calls, common mistakes, how to correct them, tools available to help you. We basically give you the whole playbook on how to improve this, in my opinion, very vulnerable area of most practices. Because if a new patient calls and they don't have a great experience and they have other choices, they may never call again. And today we're going to jump in and give you some practical advice on how to prevent that from happening in your practice. I'm hoping you enjoy the conversation. I'm hoping that you find it actionable. And as a quick reminder, my goal as your host is to help you find untapped potential in your practice. I'm hosting the Power Hour to be a resource for you. So if you're listening today, I want to hear from you. You can find me on eugeneshatsman.com or on the Power Hour website. Send me a note with your thoughts, ideas, and what you'd like to learn from, if there's any feedback you'd like to share. And just in general, I love to hear from you. With that in mind, let's go to today's conversation. Dr. Jeff Lewis, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thanks, Eugene. Really happy to be here.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show. And today's topic is what I would call one of the biggest ones where it's a hidden fire bucket, right? This is a bucket of money that you're just setting on fire every single month. And we talk about this often, Jeff, and I know you kind of laugh at my fire bucket analogy, but just to give our audience a little bit of, before we get into this topic, just to give our audience a little bit of context, you as an optometrist and a marketer have a unique perspective because you've really done it all. You've been a practice owner, you've specialized in low vision, dry eye, you've co-managed tens of thousands of refractive surgery patients alongside a corneal specialist, and now you're helping others grow. Just give people a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into today's topic.
Sure. Yes. As you said, I've kind of been there and done it. I've owned a couple of practices over the last 25 years or so. And I think early on, like especially after the first practice that I owned, a couple of years into it, I realized that the marketing side of the operation was very interesting, intriguing, dynamic. You could push buttons all of a sudden and things would happen, fill a schedule. And being in the San Francisco Bay Area and having all of this technology that was kind of being cultivated around me, it just I was lucky, I think, to get kind of a head start into the digital realm. And that led to kind of being an expert for colleagues and a friend. And, over time, helping and being an advisor kind of turned into more formal relationships. And eventually, thanks to a few connections, I found National Strategic and you. And we began working together. It just made much more sense to be able to work together to kind of serve, my colleagues a little bit better. And I guess now my role, I wear a lot of different hats, but my primary role with NSG is as I would say, practice optimizer, for lack of a better description. Right. I help practices with new initiatives, myopia management, dry eye, et cetera. I also make sure that I'm in the trenches, like with the day-to-day marketing, our SEO, our snack pack, our Google ads, recall and reactivation, making sure that is strategic, tuned to not only the needs, but also matches what happens at an operational level. So I'm able to kind of bring insight into what it's like to actually be in the trenches, to know what those conversations are like with patients, and ultimately, identify opportunities, but ultimately to make their marketing or make our clients' marketing generate a greater ROI.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff, this is why I was so excited to have you on the show, because I don't think I can think of a better person to have this conversation with. Because again, you've had the perspective of being in the practice, being the optometrist with the front desk, and what happens when you pick up the phone. And at the same time, you also have the perspective of, hey, you're listening to your clients' phone calls today at NSG. You know what's happening on the other line. So we're going to give people some behind the scenes stuff during the conversation. But the reason I think it's so relevant to have the conversation now is that I'm seeing more and more data that's showing that phone calls are up, and there's a good reason why phone calls to practices are up rather than necessarily appointment schedules on, even if you have a schedule on your in your practice. And I think what's happening is this kind of reel back from so much content that was created by AI, right? Last year, 2023, AI became kind of the new normal for creating content. And a lot of people went all in, right? And many people started creating content, and then many people who created content were not good actors. We've got plenty of fake content, overwhelming numbers of unreliable content out there, fake websites, fake social media posts, fake investment scams, fake chatbots. And so, also patients don't really trust the written word on the website like they used to anymore. And they don't actually trust handing over their information into websites, especially new patients. So what we've found is that phone calls are up anywhere between 10 to 15%, even if traffic is constant. And there's data and studies that show that when patients were asked within the last 6 to 12 months, how would you prefer to book an appointment with an online scheduler or an online chat tool, or would you prefer to book an appointment with a person, with a phone call? It was surprising to me that data is now showing that patients are back to about 50-50. 50% prefer the online experience, and 50% seem to prefer calling a practice, having a conversation, getting their questions answered, and then scheduling the appointment. What's interesting about that is that number was actually much higher during, immediately after the pandemic and during the pandemic. And obviously, the technology didn't support the desired patient experience. And so some people have gone back to that. And in fact, I checked our data right before this episode, is that it looks like when people find the practice in the snack pack, the pack of three, when you Google, I don't know, eye doctor near me, and the pack of three comes up with the snack pack with all of the reviews and stuff, 60% of conversions are phone calls, and 40% of conversions are clicks to appointment schedule or website. So that is really interesting, I think. And this is why this is relevant today more than before, because patients choose to have the conversation. And so, the question I'm asking is, what kind of conversations are we having, and how can we optimize this part of the practice?
Right. So for us and for NSG, there is, and for myself as well, I mean, there's an obsessive need, I think, to understand what is happening on those phone calls. We spend so much time and energy and resource on marketing. We are meticulously optimizing their SEO, like how they show up, improving websites so that more visitors turn into, patients, making their recall more strategic, optimizing ad campaigns, whether it's social media or Google ads, like all of this with the intention of improving the conversion rate, the
Right.
rate at which patients, click a link to request or schedule or book from the website, the GBP, as you mentioned, even text, for that matter. But the outcome of all those things, at least half the time, are calls. And so we need to understand and know what's happening on the phones.
Yeah. So why don't you tell people what we're learning when we're listening to these calls?
Well, first of all, we track and record every call. We listen to a lot of them. We have a team in the Philippines that, listened, I think last year, wasn't it? They listened to like over 10,000 calls, probably a little bit, probably in the 12,000 range, I believe. And they documented every outcome and generate some amazing reports that we're able to, show and present with clients. And, the outcome, Eugene, is unfortunately, it isn't great. I would say less than 80% of offices answer their calls during business hours, or less than 80% of calls, I'm sorry, are answered during business hours. And when we do answer the phones, new patient appointments are scheduled less than 40% of the time, around 40% of the time, and existing patients about 80%. So,
okay, wait, hold on, Jeff. I
yeah,
mean, these are big numbers for people to realize.
yeah,
Okay, so you said the answer rate during business hours is 80% approximately,
right,
which means that we're letting 20% of calls go to voicemail or just get hung up on. And it's I think it's a really big falsehood that, well, if a patient really wants to book, they're going to leave a message. That might be true for a patient who already knows you, but it's almost certainly not true for a patient who doesn't know you, right?
no,
So that's part one. But
right,
then when we do answer the phone, so now our bucket of 80 calls or a bucket of 100 calls is down to 80. And let's say half of those are new patient calls. Out of those new patient calls, we're going to book only 40% of those patient opportunities and leave 60% on the table or in the garbage or whatever, wherever you want to put your money that's on fire.
right,
And then the existing patients, I would have thought this number is higher, but it's 80% of existing patients end up getting scheduled when they call, which means that you're turning 20% of existing patients away. I mean, there's probably questions I could ask about what are we saying to turn those patients away, but that is really, that's a lot of money and time and dollars that we're, basically setting on fire.
yeah, yeah. You hit it, and it's partly why I think your analogy has always struck a nerve. It's I kind of laugh, but it's sort of a painful laugh because you think about the money, the reputation, the goodwill. All of that is going to waste, and you can calculate it, right?
Right. I mean, let's imagine a practice sees, I don't know, what, 250 patients per month, average $400 a patient. That's what, $100,000 a month, right? Then let's say you drop the ball on, I don't know, like let's pick a conservative number. 25% of calls that could have been patients don't turn into patients. That's another, I don't know, 2 to 3 patients per day, and
Right.
multiply that out 20 days, what, 50 per month. That's $20,000 per month in revenue. And that's just this year, right? Because then those patients are also the ones that didn't get scheduled are also not coming back next year.
Yeah.
They went somewhere else, or they decided to defer, or they got their stuff online, whatever. And that's significant. $20,000 per month, $250,000 a year, just with this opportunity. And that's why I really wanted to highlight it for our listeners, is that this is significant.
Yeah. It's huge. It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. So listen, let me just get down to the point: is that where's the real opportunity? How good can these 40% of 40% of new patient calls scheduled, 80% of existing patient calls scheduled? What could these numbers really be? And let's talk about what's out there, what's possible.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what's interesting is that we were put in a position and kind of like backed into a position, a few years ago where, typically we get on a call and one part of that call is, we have a call report. We can show a client what those calls look like. We listen to a few. I always listen to a few myself just to, it's a good way to connect to like what's going on with the staff. And, it's a
Sure.
better way of engaging and having that discussion. And I forget which client it was, but they said to you, I believe that conversation was like, I give up on this. Like, why don't you just do it for me? And it was like, they kind of came to their wits' end. And it's easy to do that with this because if you listen to your calls, oftentimes you want to crawl into a hole with maybe a bottle of wine because it can be quite painful. And so that was an analogy, actually, a colleague used recently. And so we were kind of backed into we thought, okay, let's create a call center. And so it was a lot of work. And I think it took around 3 or 4 months or so. And at the end of the day, we realized that we were up to 100% conversion rate on those calls. And I think the last that I checked, this year, we were up to 109% conversion rate. So we learned something.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to clarify for the listeners: this is not a pitch for the National Strategic Call Center. We do not really want to take on new clients in that call center. We already kind of have a waiting list. This is not necessary. It truly was an experiment because for over a decade we had been dispensing advice of like, well, you should do this on your phone calls, you should do that on your phone calls, you should do this, and clients are finally like, and clients say, okay, that's really good advice, I'll try that. And they do that and there's some improvement. And then, sometimes 90 days later, it kind of goes back. And we're just constantly dispensing advice on like, here, turn more of these marketing opportunities that you're getting into dollars in your practice. And finally, one of those clients, who just, as Jeff said, were just kind of like, look, I hear your advice. I've tried it. Why don't you just do it for me? And so that's when we started this call center. Now, this 109%, Jeff, I'll let you explain how this is possible.
Yeah, it's sort of it's very interesting, and it's you could call it farming, but it's not agriculture, obviously. But there is a point in the phone call, and I think the best place for this is when you're about to find a date and a time for a patient. Like, Ms. Jones, I see that we have availability tomorrow at 4:30. And it looks like we also have a couple of slots. Is there anyone else in the family who might be overdue for an eye exam or who needs an eye exam? And we know this, that, like when I listen to calls, I hear, some significant percentage of the time, someone from a family member is calling on behalf of another family member. And so the magic, or not so much magic, but literally it's like, who else could be potentially a patient that might come in with you for this appointment? We have the availability for it or the capacity, and we trained the person answering the call to look for that. And I think around 25% of the time, like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we do get a second booking or a second appointment with that.
And that's interesting because, again, you think about it, 100 people call your office that we could qualify as appointment opportunities. And I call an appointment opportunity anything, not just someone who says, Dr. Lewis, I would like an appointment. And then like somehow you manage not to screw that up. I consider an appointment opportunity somebody who calls and says, how much is an eye exam? Do you guys take VSP, or whatever the question is that leads the conversation down the appointment opportunity path. So I think the absolute conversion rate, I don't know the numbers quite as well as you do, Jeff, but I think the absolute conversion rate is somewhere in the high 80s, low 90s, meaning of 100 people who call, let's just say 90 out of 100 are going to turn into patients. But the absolute appointment number is exactly that, 109 this year, which means that out of 100 appointment opportunity patients, you get 109 appointments. And just by utilizing this technique that you just described, which, actually I think the term farming came from one of our clients who actually taught us this, right? Like the client was like the one, oh yeah, well, back in the day when we were really good at that. And we said, oh, okay, well, we'll try it. And then it's the whole concept of making your marketing an experiment rather than just a thing you do over and over again. So, okay, well, let's try it. And then when we tried it, we said, okay, let's insert it into a couple different spots in the conversation. So you could do it at the end of the conversation. You could do it exactly when you're picking the time. You could do it multiple times at the end of the conversation. I was like, oh, well, your appointments are going fast. And I've got yours secured for next Tuesday at 3. Is there anybody else in your household while I got the schedule up who needs an appointment? And it's like, oh, okay, well, and you're just being helpful, not overly salesy. And by that point, the person like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I can answer that question with a yes. So, and I will also say, because we did stack the deck a little bit with this call center development, we happened to have, and we got really, really lucky. There was a person on the national strategic team who was not in that job before, or was not in that job at National Strategic, but but she had previously in her resume managed and really successfully managed a pretty large call center. So she had all of the, kind of the commitment to excellence and a lot of ideas and tools and whatever. And when this client approached us with this idea of, hey, can you guys start a call center? We turned to Mary and we said, Mary, I know you're not running a call center right now, you're doing a different job, but what if we started a call center? Would you be interested in running it? And she said, yeah, that's great. Right. So my thought is that, there are things that happen, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later in the episode. There are things that happen in our call center that like re-engage people all the time and manage them correctly to constantly stick to this commitment to excellence. But so we got a little bit of a leg up on this. But the truth is, it's still something that functions today, and it's something where we kind of, you talk the talk, right, and you also walk the walk.
Yeah, yeah. The premise is that this is possible. That practices leave tens of thousands of dollars in some cases on the table.
Right, setting money on fire.
Yes, as you like to say, right? Yeah, and there are some proven strategies for sure that can help, that ensure success with this.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you what these strategies are, because obviously that's why our listeners are here. They want to. I think we've sold the idea that we all need to pay attention to this. So, what are the things that we need to do?
Yeah, just broadly speaking, two categories. Management, which is on ownership on us, and then accountability for the people who are answering the phone. So, really owner's responsibility, and then what the reps, the staff should be doing on the phones.
Right. Okay. So let's start with that second part, which is what should the reps be doing on the phones?
Yeah. So as you know, I listen to a ton of calls, and it took me a while to get into the rhythm of it because it is kind of a painful experience to go through, and I have to say that
very, very true, by the way, because if people pass my office and they hear me screaming, the only time I ever scream is when I'm hearing my client's money being set on fire, and it's just like, these are like cries of pain coming from my office, and I don't usually do it with a bottle of wine. I'd probably be much calmer if I did, but
I don't know. I don't think that's a healthy way to go. But as an owner, and I'm sure people listening who are in positions of ownership, which most of you are, it was always a joke that my staff was amazed that I could hear conversations happening like across the office, even in bigger offices. And, there's an attuning to what's going on, and, we're listening, and, oftentimes maybe having one conversation, but cringing a little because we hear another conversation that could be run a little bit better. So it is somewhat of a painful process to listen to these calls. And, I feel, viscerally connected to the practices that we serve. Like it's easier. Maybe that's a problem, but it serves us well. But I think that from what I hear in listening to a lot of calls, I hear well-meaning people, trying to get off the phone quickly. Impatience, and I think many practices rely on a front desk staff who is just like juggling way too much. And I think probably 3 or 4, common mistakes that I hear on phones. For example, do you have appointments available next week? Yes, we do. Well, and that's it. I mean, literally like a drop off. Okay. So yeah, we confirm that there's availability, but the staff member didn't really take control over what's the next step. And, maybe that sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how much that comes up. Lack of kind of personalization overall. I need to schedule an eye exam. What day would you like to come in? And that's pretty much it. So the staff member kind of jumps right into scheduling without asking for the caller's name, without building any kind of rapport. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the major pillars for for answering calls. And so the interaction starts off at being impersonal, and that has like huge downstream effects. And you can just see a failing call like early on in the conversation. Another one that comes up a lot, I have a red eye or I have dry eyes, and I really need to, I need some advice, or I need to come in. And the staff member kind of jumps right into, we can help you with that. Like, would you like to schedule an appointment now? And the problem is that the staff member kind of moved a little bit too fast without addressing concerns. And we might say, whoa, oh gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that that's happening. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? When did it start? I mean, a similar thing comes up when patients will call and say, hi, do you have any appointments available today? And the person answering the call says no. And without saying, well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, click. That's all I wanted to add is that I hear those calls all the time, and I think I know what you're angling at. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a great opportunity to like understand a little bit about where they're coming from, like what's happening. I understand you really need an appointment today. Like, when was your last exam? Finding out, discovering more information about the situation before kind of moving on to the next step. That is the crucial step that I hear kind of over and over, and that it also misses a chance of building rapport, because as you move through the call conversation, there are going to be moments of, what's your last name? Can you spell it for me? Like, these are some times we've got to work on a schedule. And those are hard things to do without having rapport. They become almost impossible to do. And so impossible to close.
And I think I was surprised, Jeff, that you haven't said this, or maybe you're getting to it. Is that my least favorite one to hear is how much is an eye exam? And then the answer is, well, without insurance, that's going to be $171 or whatever it is, right? Like, or do you have insurance? Well, I don't know. I just, and then there's this awkward, like, almost every call starts with some sort of weird fumble about like, which insurance company do you have, and do you take my insurance, and do you do this and whatever. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how we address those types of things. But the how much is an eye exam? It's $150. Goodbye. That's the conversation I hate the most. I can't stand to hear that conversation. It's just like money on fire right in front of your eyes.
Right. And, that could be the question that comes up in the beginning, or it might come up after we've established that we don't know what the insurance is. And then boom, right to it's $185 for your eye exam. And you just know that it's over without any description of what is an eye exam comprised of? What do we do? And
how do we differentiate? And is this, and we really have the best technology, and we have an amazing doctor, and we're happy to, and since you haven't had your eye exam for a couple of years, we'll be able to look at the front of the eye and the back of the eye. And the stuff that happens in your practice for sure, but let's, tell the patient what to expect so that we can decommoditize it. Right.
Exactly. I mean, you need a framework. And, I don't know if this is okay. I mean, I'd like to share, if it's not proprietary NSG, frameworks, I think, we might be able to talk a little bit about what some of the things that we can do in order to.
Yeah, Jeff. Open book. Let's go. I think our listeners need the advice. So let's do it. So I think the most important thing is that whatever parts of the framework you want to share, the advice I'd give to the listeners is that training is something that is important. So everything that Jeff shares with you, you got to turn it into some sort of training inside of your practice, because inconsistent training almost always leads to variability in the call handling and what happens in ultimately your close rate. So Jeff, jump into the framework, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I think the best way to sort of frame it is really there are I think the five major pillars. Making a first impression would be number one, and we can talk more about that. But first impression is absolutely key, and I think the reason why we recommend a very well crafted script as part of that first impression, process. And, we can also talk a little bit more about scripting, but that's, certainly important. And we alluded to the second kind of pillar in a framework in sort of best practices is a phone triage and process. Like, what are they calling about? Where do we get them? How do we get them to the right person? Do they need to be talking to optical? Do they need to be talking to, a patient coordinator or someone else? Finding out very quickly, and getting the patient to the right place. So triage, rapport and connection is huge. Right. So establishing rapport, bringing these people into the fold, like that kind of comes with the script. And the scripting, we teach people how to talk about what differentiates us, what our, unique selling proposition is. But what that ultimately expresses is that there's a connection. Now this patient feels like they're a part of us. They're with us. They're going to hang in there for the rest of this process. They know they're going to be taken care of. And throughout that, the fourth pillar is being able to control the call and build value as you control. So taking control means this is, I understand that, you need to schedule an appointment, and I know how important that is for you. So we're going to take the next step here. So being able to step in, and you can talk more to this as well, Eugene, but being able to explain, what are the core components of why this exam is necessary, or how long you're going to be here, kind of building in value as you take that patient from one step to the next. And then I think the last part is the close and the confirm, and there are tons of ways, or I think, well, tons, but a few very crucial ways of confirming the end of a call. And a lot of calls, even though we've got the appointment on the book, there's a drop off before that patient feels like they are truly connected. It goes back to rapport and connection, but in that close, do they understand what the next steps are, and what the future, if we're pacing for that patient, give them a sense or a vision of what it's going to be like, a vision, no pun intended, right? What it's going to be like to experience, give them directions, make sure they understand where to go, where to park, little nuances about the town. Oh, there's traffic at this part of town, so you may want to go a different direction. Understanding the community. And that goes a long way, we've found, in making sure that those patients show up, because, obviously another conversation is the no-show rate. So, but those are five of the main components. I'd circle back to the importance of script, but
I'll summarize them. So first impression, the phone triage process, the rapport and kind of the connection, the build, and then controlling the call, building value during that control, and then don't forget to close and confirm, as you were saying. Now, the one thing, there's a couple of things that I think I want to zoom in on as you were talking through this framework. First impression, right? Everybody answers the phone. And oftentimes it's ABC Eye Care. This is Susie. How can I help you? There's two elements of that. And I think this is really, really important. The words you say during that first impression, and also the tonality that you use. And I'll talk a little bit about tonality, and you can talk about the words. But the tonality component, if you think about communication in general, there's the 738-55 rule, which is that, callers can't see you. So the tonality in your voice might be the most important element of a successful phone communication. By the way, the 738-55, the 7% of meaning in human communication, 7% of meaning is the words that you speak. 38% is the tonality in your voice. And then 55% is your body language or facial expressions, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why I think our YouTube channel has picked up a little bit, because some people enjoy listening, and they're listening not just for words, but for tonality. And I guess the other part I'll say about that is that, yes, the words that you say really matter, but that they also kind of matter to the person who's saying them. And I'll tell you, I guess if you think about the type of tone you want to have, one of the techniques that I've heard, and I actually heard this from a world class sales trainer once, is that the people who are answering the phone put a mirror in front of them on their desk and remind them, and literally right on top of the mirror, smile. And so when you're on the phone, you gotta smile, and that turns the tonality. People can hear that smile. It's a positive and friendly output, and it really helps set the tone. No pun intended, or I guess maybe intended, but it really does set the tone for the whole conversation, right? So,
Absolutely.
and the words, Jeff. Let's talk about the words, because again, first impression, words.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the 7%. No, I'm just kidding. The words are absolutely important, and I think this is where the script comes back in. So having and it's not just about having a script; it's about um, you know incentivizing your staff to actually practice and memorize and train on that script. And so that could mean rehearsing 50, 100 times. I forget the number that we had settled on. It may be, and it's definitely in the hundreds of times that
Oh yeah.
it takes in order to feel like you've embodied a script. And it could be, service-based greetings are an example of words. Thank you for calling CFI Care today. This is Jeff speaking. How can I improve your vision today? It sounds a little cheesy at first and maybe not, a little bit artificial, but when you've practiced it and you embody it, how can we help you see better today? How can we help you see more clearly today? These things actually do make a difference. People change. And with tonality, with the other components of this, you can build, and you can start beginning to build rapport, pardon me, and connection, very early on.
Well, and you know what's interesting is that, and we had this happen at one of our clients where we told them to do it, and they went all in. They went like super cheesy, or they went from blah blah blah. How can I help you? They went to the how can I make your day better today? Because one of their core values is that they really wanted people to feel like this was one of the best parts of their day, like coming to their practice. So they actually started saying, thank you for calling ABC Eye Care. How can I? This is Eugene. How can I make your day better today? And you can't say that in a crappy tone. You just
No.
can't say that. And how can I make your day better? You just can't do that. So it's like, so you have to say it in a different tone, and it sets the groundwork for the whole conversation. That's why I wanted to drill down on this point of the first pillar of this first impression, because it really is like, it gets the caller in the mindset, like the person you're talking to, but it also gets the person who's answering the phone in the mindset of like, I need to be happy, I need to be bubbly, and my job is to help this person with their vision. I got to do that. So just say that up front.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one thing that when you begin listening to your calls and you hear what your staff is dealing with, and they're dealing with regular people are calling in. And if you don't, this first impression gives you the opportunity to set the tone with them, and it has this like magnetic effect of kind of shifting the way that person shows up for the call on the other side of it. So by taking the time to say, hi, thank you for calling. This is so-and-so speaking. How can I help you? How can I make your day better? Even if that sounded or felt a little bit cheesy, but you had to embody it a little bit, you've already shifted the way that person is feeling, on another dimension on the other line. And so they behave better. People end up like conforming to that right away. They're like, rather than like, yeah, I need an appointment. It could be like, oh, well, thank you for asking. Well, or they pause and think about it and sort of reset themselves before, and it makes the conversation easier for everyone. So I see that happening.
And you're right in the context of this also opens the door to call control. And, look, we could probably spend a full hour and a half on this framework alone. So maybe, if the audience requests, we'll spend more time on it. But my goal is to kind of help people with the areas of true highlights. So let's go to call control. And when I think about call control, basically, if there are so many times where where it seems like the person who is answering the phone feels like their job is just to answer questions. So, how much is an eye exam? How are you guys open on Saturdays? Do you guys take VSP? Like, those are all questions, and like, I might even in a friendly tone answer those questions, but I have no control of the conversation. So, look, Jeff, I'll give you a little quiz. If a patient calls and says, "I'd like," the first thing out of their mouth is, "I'd like to book an eye exam, but can you tell me how much it costs first, or how much is an eye exam?" What do you say to take
Yeah,
control?
exactly. So what you do is you step back and you say, "Well, like absolutely, eye exams are super important, and I know how important they are. Obviously, we use our vision all the time. And it sounds like it's important to you, but eye exams are composed of X number of parts. You'll be seen by so and so who's been in practice for X amount of years, and we do this, and you'll be evaluated, and you'll be tested for we're going to look for macular degeneration and glaucoma and cataracts, and we're going to do a testing of your vision. We call that a refraction, and then we're going to have a discussion with the doctor about the next steps, and there'll be recommendations, and like it's much more of a it's an opportunity to take control, but also build value at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're going straight to value building. I think that's fantastic. I love. I mean, the most important part of a phone call is decommoditizing the eye exam for the patient, right? Especially if it's a new patient, they don't know what's going to happen. You got to make sure that it sounds like they're going to be getting something that they can't get at a big box store or at a in another place. But I like to try to make sure that there is a world in which the patient, you get a couple of yeses out of the patient early on in the conversation. So I try to say, I'd like to lead you to the answer to your question, but in order for me to lead you to the answer to your question, I got to take I got to take a little detour to make sure that I can fully answer your question. Is that okay? You say yes. Okay, great. So I don't. That's not exactly what I'd say. I'd say something like, yeah, I, I'd love to check in. We can certainly see how much an eye exam would cost for you, but let's just to make sure we have the best care possible. Is it okay if I walk you through how our examination process works and gather a little bit more information from you first? Get a yes, right? And now all of a sudden I am now in control. I'm the one asking questions. I'm the one dispensing information, but you feel comfortable. I think people want to give control to someone who knows what they're doing. When someone calls and asks you a question, they're just trying to shop for a commodity, right? Are you an exam place that's open on Saturdays? Are you an exam place that takes VSPs? Are you an exam place? So I love where you went, which is the value building component, because that's so important. Because the first step is, get their permission to take you through the process, and then second, take them through the process to get them to understand the distinction that you have in private practice or in whatever practice you work in over your competitor across the street.
Yes, yes, yeah. Good podcast control there, Eugene. Yes, I jumped to value. I think you're absolutely right that it's very important to stop and let's talk a little bit about where you're coming from. And it comes back to discovery. It's like, okay, you are asking for this, but like, tell me a little bit about your life. Have you had your eyes examined in the last couple of years? Because that gives me a little bit of background into, where we're going to go next or what you might be coming in for or how we're going to be able to help you. And that also leads into value.
So the last part, because I'm trying to make sure we don't spend again an hour and a half on just this one part of the topic, because we got a lot of stuff that I'm sure our listeners are going to want to hear about.
Yeah.
The last point here is closing, right? Like, you've had the conversation, and sometimes you just hear these painful conversations. And people just answer the phone. I answer the phone, and then they answer the questions, and then nothing, right? And then it's just like nothing. And so we actually did this test, Jeff, and I'm going to ask you, because this was for a recent talk that I gave in June, and I asked our research team to basically look at, I think it was like 100 and something phone calls, and see how many times the staff asked to schedule an appointment after the conversation had begun, which is basically the closing question, right? The like, would you like to schedule an appointment, Dr. Lewis? Like, so we tested this to see of those types of question calls, how many times out of 100, how many times out of 100 do you think people asked to close or asked for the close? And this was across, by the way, 17 different, no, sorry, 27 different practices.
Wow. I would say 20 times.
You are you have a lot of faith in humanity, my friend. No, it was actually zero. Zero times out of 100. And I think it was really closer to like 90 something phone calls that we listened to. Zero times somebody took that kind of question call flow and took it to, would you like me to help you find an appointment, or could I all right, and you have all the information, right? So would you like to schedule an appointment? It's that simple question. And they didn't ask. And most of the time, the patient was like, okay, thanks. And if you don't ask, you're not going to get, right? So this is where I just remind people that some of the stuff is super simple. It's just kind of incorporating the closing into the script, as Jeff was saying. By the way, what's your opinion on scripts?
I think we need them. We need them in the very beginning for sure. And, we must have good scripts and have the staff like learn them and refine them over time. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that the reason people resist scripts is because they don't want it to sound like you're reading, right?
Yeah.
So how do
And
you do?
You do in the beginning. It does sound like you're reading in the beginning, but that's why it's the repetitions of the script and the rehearsals that really matter.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the part where I wanted to hit next, which is that what do we need to do if we're not the ones answering the phone? What do we need to do as managers that truly, ultimately help drive success for the team? And maybe I'll summarize this in the context of what happens in our call center. Because it is really, we've gotten to this 109% industry leading close rate, and I'm just like super excited about it. But what does it take? Well, your team is answering the phones over and over and over and over again. And that's a pretty repetitive job, and you can't blame anyone for just kind of getting, I don't know, a little bit redundant, a little bit tired of doing a redundant job. And so, especially if you've got someone who's specializing in answering calls, which is something I think we'd recommend, because you can't necessarily manage the front desk and a patient checking in and a patient checking out and somebody trying to hand you their credit card while you're answering the phone and trying to do all the good stuff that we're telling you to do. So truth is, you probably need someone dedicated, whether they're sitting in the back or they're sitting at home or they're remote somewhere. You need someone. And but as a manager of that person, you got to have scorecards. You've got to have training. You've got to have regular call reviews. And call reviews, I mean, it really is as simple. And I've led call reviews in the past, and I think that we've trained our client strategists to lead call reviews, but it's simply as simple as playing the phone call and then asking the team, and there's two or three people who might be answering the phone, and they're all sitting there, and you would just ask, okay, let's talk about that call. What do you think went well? What do you think could have gone better? And people know. It's just kind of the process of letting them know that you're listening and then discussing it out in the open with them. And, today, and people, some people get squeamish or like, oh, I don't like listening to myself on the phone. It doesn't matter. We're going to do it for everybody. Today is Susie's turn. Tomorrow is John's turn. The day after that is, Eugene's turn. Who cares? Doesn't really matter. If the organization has a culture of continuous improvement, it's really easy to say, guys, we're just going to do this because we want to get better, because we want to serve more patients, because we want to make a bigger impact on our community. And that means getting really good at what we can do on the phone. So we're going to review our phone calls, and we're going to spend 20 minutes every week, and we're going to play a phone call, and we're going to talk about what went well, what could have gone better. And, we'll play another phone call, and then we'll run out of time, and then we'll pick it up next week. But that type of stuff really, it's the very basics, but at the very least, just the process of knowing that you're going to hold people accountable to what happens on the phone, that they can't hide there, brings things up to the surface.
Yeah, yeah. Just simply the act of listening to calls and going over them can be, incredibly impactful. They have been for me, and I know I see it happen, and I see the transformation happen with our clients when we do just what you outlined.
Right. But everybody will say, I don't have time to pick the calls or to listen to calls, before I play them for my staff.
Yeah, but this is money that's you're setting on fire. I mean, this is
Right.
costing like money. I mean, it's really like found gold in a practice.
Yeah,
It
and
really.
so, I'm big on AI, so this is where I get excited, and I think I've talked about this on a previous episode, when I talked to somebody about AI. But there are tools out there that can help this type of problem, that can help you figure out which calls you should be listening to.
You're talking about Ring AI. Yeah, yeah, it's super powerful. Interesting how we've come back around to AI right from the beginning of this conversation. But yeah, you're sharing it all. Okay, good. We're not going to have any hidden secrets by the end of this, Eugene.
Yeah,
So
right. So Ring AI, and I mean, it's not really that big of a deal. And it really is only available from two companies in the country. So what one of them being us. But it's a tool that's so inexpensive. It is so freaking inexpensive. It's a huge opportunity because all it does is it's an AI system that listens to your calls, and it's been trained by all the hundreds of thousands of calls that it's listened to, and humans who have fed it information. It's been trained to know whether the call was a new patient or an existing patient. It's been trained to know whether the call was closed or not closed. It's been trained to listen for specific words like insurance or scheduling related issues, or unhappy patients, and just listening for specific words in the conversation. The transcription's pretty good. Is it 100% perfect? No, you're not going to make AI 100% perfect, but it absolutely gives you a point to look at to say, okay, let me ask the AI which 10 calls didn't turn into patients. Okay, those are the 10 calls. Instead of listening to 100 calls to find those 10, I can just listen to the 10 calls to find the 10 calls I need to review with my team. That's it, And it also gives you a whole bunch of metrics, which you could know every single day. Literally, you can log into log into the system every single day and know how many phone calls turned into appointments.
yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody keeps track of their capture rates, right? We have dashboards that are set up for that. I mean, what if you could scorecard your phone capture rate?
Yeah, that's really well said, Jeff. That the phone capture rate would be, another good one to pay attention to if there was a reliable way to keep track of that. And other things you might care about are, in addition to just total capture rate, you might say, what percentage of calls did we answer? What percentage of calls turn into appointments? What percentage of calls were customer service calls? And then if somebody's calling constantly, if you're getting a bunch of customer service calls where people asking like, where are my frames, and, are my glasses in or whatever, that might point to an expectation setting problem. And you could reduce the strain on your call team by properly setting expectations up front. So this is in my mind, this is a must have for most practices, because the reality is having an idea of phone capture rate gives you an idea of where the found money is, or worse, where the money on fire is in your practice, and you've got a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, yeah, and after I manually listening to tons of calls over the last few years, I mean it's a huge savings, a time savings for management, for a few $100, and you can give your team a regular shot in the arm and get another $10,000 or $20,000 per month out of it. It's crazy ROI.
Yeah, it's great. Anyway, so I don't think one topic, and I see if we can get through this in a couple minutes, is I don't think we've talked about outsourcing, because a lot of people are going to say, well, what's your opinion on people overseas answering the phones? And the truth is that that's a popular thing right now, because the job market's been tight, and maybe you realize you need someone more than your front desk to answer the phone, but you think about going overseas.
Yeah, you can certainly have people answering the calls people answering calls from all different parts of the world. I think the ranges are around between $8 and $15 an hour or so.
So, what feedback are we hearing from clients who've implemented these services? I want to be really objective on this because I truly, truly respect the global economy. As you know, we have employees in different parts of the world as well, and I respect that 100%. Let's just talk objectively. What are we hearing from clients?
Yeah, I mean, mixed. I think probably right down the middle. Pardon me. The good, we're always able to answer a call. On the downside, you need to connect with people in order to make a sale or have a conversion. So overcoming objections, to the close is a problem. The person must inherently sound like they tend to inherently sound like they're not a part of the practice, and so they don't kind of win those early trust points in the call. So that's sort of the downside, I suppose.
Yeah, and when we do it in our call center, and this is expensive to do, by the way,
Yeah.
we try to teach the team to act like they're in the practice. So, if I'm sitting in Cleveland, but I'm answering the call for El Paso, the truth is I need to know what the weather is in El Paso today. I need to know what the community events were in El Paso over the weekend. I need to know, and then quite frankly, the people sitting in our Cleveland office who are answering calls for El Paso, they're bilingual. They can talk to the patient whether the patient is in talking in Spanish or they're talking in English, because that's what the population in El Paso is like, and that's also what the customer service population, that's what the experience is like inside the practice. So I think the goal would be match the person answering the phone. Again, it's a first impression, right? Match the person answering the phone to the experience that's going to be inside the practice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the conversion rate is like ultimately, crucial. Not necessarily the, answer rate. I mean, if you're having trouble just getting phone calls answered, then, use a call center. But if you're having trouble closing, I think investing, as you said, in training or finding someone dedicated who can sound truly like an extension of your practice, even if it's a single individual that can work remotely, is, the answer.
Right, but you still have to manage those people. If you have an individual who's working remotely, this is the my takeaway for the business managers, the practice managers, the owners in the audience. You still have to manage the people who are answering the phone, and managing those people means that you've got to have a commitment to doing certain things on a regular basis.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Comprehensive training, covering call etiquette, handling difficult calls, booking appointments, role playing scenarios, different to practice with different types of calls, and then just ongoing training to keep everyone's skills up to date.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the key part. And by the way, I forgot about role play. Our call center actually does role play with each other and with their manager almost on a daily, if not certainly on a weekly basis. And they're doing those call reviews that I described on a daily basis. So I think it makes perfect sense. So last question, if you go through these changes, right? If you are the practice that's like, okay, I'm going to do some of these things, how does a practice know and measure the success of kind of newfound focus on call management strategies?
Yeah, I think it comes down to Eugene. Track key performance indicators or your KPIs like the answer rate, the appointment booking rate. I would split it into new patient, existing patient, and
Right.
Patient satisfaction as well. In addition to that, regular review of call recordings for quality assurance, and use a tool as needed. There are great ones out there.
All right, Jeff, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I hope that our audience got a lot out of it. I think this is a burning, literally a burning problem inside of most practices. I hate seeing our listeners' money be set on fire. I hate seeing our clients' money be set on fire. So if you need any help, if you need any resources, we're happy to share some. Reach out to National Strategic. Very, very passionate about this particular topic. But I'm glad I was able to catch you and have you come on the show because I know that you're constantly talking to your clients about this, and I've heard you talk to your clients about it, and I know that your clients have actually implemented some of these changes and have done really well with it. So thank you, Jeff, for sharing some of your wisdom, and thanks for being part of the conversation today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey there, it's Eugene, and I've got a question for you. Do you do medical billing in your practice? What if we took 10 charts and looked at them pretty closely? Would they be good enough to pass an audit, or would you owe the insurance company some money? Or would there be some found revenue that you could put back in your pocket? So looking at 10 charts